Hello, today I'll show you how I created this hand-drawn perspective view of a creek crossing within a landscape project, primarily looking at how I added the people in and created a sense of movement and whimsicalness in the children throughout the perspective. And then we'll show you a time-lapse recording of how I sketched the perspective view here. So here is how I created this perspective view. First, starting off by a quick sketch, roughing in what I'm picturing the space to look like. Did this in a few minutes, and then create a new layer, tone down the opacity of the original one, and start sketching in a thicker line weight some of the key features, such as the stones crossing through the creek and the surrounding vegetation of the creek bed. Highlighting some details in the central part of the creek, and then roughing in the outer parts of the creek and what is closest to the view. And then as it goes through the rest of the area, such as the rest of the creek bed and across the creek, how that decreases with scale and level of detail. Adding in some background features, and then beginning with the trees, so the closest ones start with the darker line weights, adding in some details through the canopy and the tree bark to give some more detail. And then as the trees move back in the perspective, the line weight and pressure used decreases, and the detail also decreases to just more simple shapes and lines. And then back again into the more foreground one, where more detail through bark and foliage features get shown, opposed to more sketch-like simple lines and shapes in the rear ground. And then adding in color, starting with the creek, looking at some shadows in the stones and the blue in the creek, along with a little bit of yellow and orange blended in together, and then sketching in some of the green vegetation with lighter layers and then progressively getting darker. So next I will show you how I went through the process of adding people within this perspective. So all I do is send the original drawing from my iPad to my computer and open up that file in Photoshop, and then it'll look like so. And then up next I figure out how and where I want people to be, so showing the key features and how the site would be used and how this would lead to creative opportunities and interaction with the landscape and nature, such as crossing this creek, jumping in it, or playing along the riverbank side, as seen through these characters here, or even running in the rear ground, or a little girl playing soccer, as there is a soccer field in the background. So up first, I would want to find someone crossing the creek. So in this one here, I found a girl crossing the creek and someone reaching down to play in the creek. So I'll go back to Pinterest and I'll search child balancing, I believe is what I had searched for. Let me try this one. Copy this image, paste it in Photoshop, drag it above, release that. So now we have our picture here. I'm going to try just doing a quick, no, that won't work. Try remove background. A few ways to get the same result. That one worked pretty good. Control T, resize it. That looks about appropriate. And then we can change the opacity here to about 90%. And then we'll get a hue saturation filter that we can apply to all the people, because I don't really like when they're super saturated and bold, but also don't want them to be black and white and lose that colorfulness. Put that in a group and rename that to people. Link that saturation layer to the people only, because otherwise, as you can see, it affects the rest of the vegetation and doesn't make it look quite as saturated. Up next, we will look for more kids running. This is a project at a school ground, which is why it's focused on children more so than adults. Now in here, let's try to remove background again, see if that works. Generally that works pretty good if it's coming in as a clipped image. We'll have them running over here in the background. Since they're a little bit further back, we'll put them down to about 85%, move them into the people layer. And this one here, they're moving a little bit more than this person, the girl crossing the creek. So what I like to do, similar to the previous video if you watched it, adding the motion blur to the vehicle, we'll do the same thing here. We'll duplicate this layer though, so it preserves one of the originals, and come up to blur, motion blur, and then we want that to go to 0 degrees, so the blur is moving horizontally as the person's moving horizontally. Move that to about 35, and then we have that layer below the original one. We'll select that one, Control T, move it so it's slightly behind them. Makes it look like this appearance, like they're getting captured in motion while they're running and playing in the creek. Up next, we can find some more children playing. Actually, let's do kids exploring, as this is meant to be a area for kids to explore and interact with nature and learn. We'll do this one. Just keep it simple with a plain background. And try again, remove background. It also helps if you rename these layers to help keep it organized, but for the video I won't be focused on doing that. Resize them, put them somewhere where their figure kind of makes sense with the perspective. Change that down to 90. Control S. Now we can put adult walking with a child. Yeah, this one. Make it seem like there's some parental supervision happening here, although the idea is to have them not be super supervised so that they can engage in that unrestricted play. And I'll move this one kind of over into the back and have them a little bit smaller, like as if they're following the kid down to the river. He's leading them there because he wants to go play and see what's happening with everyone else. And we'll do one more. We'll go back again and do a kid running. Sure, this kid looks like he's really enjoying himself and is having fun playing with his friends here. Move background first. Control T, resize him. He's running down to the creek. He sees everyone enjoying themselves. He wants to go enjoy and have some fun with them. We'll do Control J, duplicate that layer. Filter, could go to blur, motion blur, but here you can just apply the same blur that happened with the previous one. Move it below the static layer. They're running from right to left, so we'll move the blur so it's on there right to left. And this kid here is a little bit more saturated and colorful than the rest, so we'll add another hue saturation layer only applied to this kid. Take his very bright orange shirt down a little bit. There we go. Close that, Control S, and then what am I looking for here? Screen mode, full screen mode, full screen. So then you can see here essentially what it looks like, how I added people into the space to give it a little bit of life, showing them playing and interacting with the space as envisioned it could be used. And then we can go ahead and turn this one off and turn this one back on. You can see this is the original that I used versus the new one. I kind of like the new one a little bit better. I like the way that these kids are playing and the way that they look, but these were just ones I already had, but gives you the idea. That's how I usually add people into my renders, if they're hand-drawn ones or even digitally rendered ones. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope you learned something.